I love the greenhouse analogy because I feel like you bring up a good point that you have to, and it comes back to your original definition of a leader, connection.
Yeah.
If you are not connected with those you are leading, you're building a greenhouse for strawberries when there's actually cucumbers
Yeah.
that you need to be, catering towards.
Exactly.
And so that could be really detrimental, I think, for
Yeah.
the people you're trying to, under your stewardship.
Yeah. And if you don't understand that, like, strawberries have a different mix of blend of fertilizer than, like,
you'd never
but you
know.
have to have that. Yeah, you would never know. You'd be like,
never
oh,
know.
yeah, I just went to Home Depot and grabbed this stuff. But, like, if you know that there's a certain grade that they have, there's a certain type of tint that they have, right? And it's because of your connection, then, or it's because of your competency of your connection,
True.
then you could do that, right? But a lot of times, as we talked about a little bit earlier, and I think the cameras were off, is just so much focus on the farmer and not the things that they're farming. Right. Oh yeah, I know how to do this. Right. This is my 50th season planting strawberries. I can do this. Right. But understanding, like, hey, strawberries back in the 1990s way different than now. You know what I mean? And I kind of take that analogy for how I kind of grew up as I coach players and coach people. I always use this analogy. I grew up in a time that I would compare to like a 1980s pickup truck. Right. Remember those back in the day? Right. We all know a 1980s truck from people who grew up back in those days. If my truck wasn't starting, right, what would I do? Call a couple friends, put that thing in neutral, right, and kickstart that battery. Yeah, push me,
that
and then boom. Yeah,
Run.
once that went on, it was on. Homies was in the back of the truck, and we were going to McDonald's, going wherever we had, right, and that's all we needed. If that didn't happen, my dad would say, hey, go into the truck, find the starter. You already know, right? Tap the starter until it turned over, right? I just hope that the truck wasn't in drive or anything because I was under it, right? Antifreeze, right? It could be easily replaced by hose water, right? Just turn on the hose and put it in there. That would give me the A and B back. They have, in 1980s pickup trucks, and in that time you'd have fuse boxes, right? If you were missing a fuse, no biggie, right? You just go grab some tin foil, put it in there, and then you just power things up, and so yeah, it's making you smile. So you know what's going on, man. So
my truck is right on the border, right there.
Right on the border, right? So that's kind of the method that I kind of grew up with, right? It's I can do that. Nowadays, in terms of connecting with people and as a leader, super important to understand that I'm not dealing with pickup trucks anymore. I'm dealing with Teslas now, and so I gotta connect and have competency in a way that moves people, and not teaches people that, hey, I know how to kickstart a truck. I got to think now, like, not like a mechanic would be, but for a pickup truck, but I got to think more of like an engineer now. And you have to evolve and develop yourself as a teacher to say, okay, they don't know what it's like, to be able to kickstart. And I know we say that a lot. We say, oh, if you guys grew up in the time, well, bro, they don't grow up in that time.
They don't care.
Yeah, and they don't care, right? It's really just and I don't want to say it as an excuse. It's just what we know as a method. But if we understand, like, hey, we've got to evolve. We've got to become engineers and not so much mechanics anymore. And we've got to know that, hey, it's not about fuse boxes anymore. It's about circuit boards now.
Yep.
Right?
We have to be adapting.
We have to adapt. We have to change. We have to increase our competency. Right, we got to update our competency so that we can know, like, hey, this is how we can maximize Tesla performance, not by kicking the starter and all that stuff. That's how. So what's the carryover? Okay, so yeah, there are two different types of automobiles. So what's the carryover? It's the principle. You still got to drive on the right side of the road, right? You still got to fuel. You still got to put on your seatbelts. You still got to have a turn signal. So instead of transferring the method, transfer the principles, because they can transfer from one generation to another, but maybe the methods are probably different. So that's where we got to get, or I got to get better in saying, okay, now I got to become more of an engineer. Let's see what methods will elevate the performance of a Tesla.
That's awesome. And I think that's a really good characteristic of a good leader, is one who can adapt. That's another really good thing, because I feel like a leader can be someone who, I don't want to say a bad leader, but a leader that lacks that quality,
right,
is someone who's very set in their ways,
right,
who is not willing to adapt. And so they try and force the strawberry to become a cucumber, because in their mind, it's always
This is our
worked,
cucumber.
right?
Yeah, this is how we do it.
But if I love that you bring that up, that a good leader is able to adapt.
Right.
Able to adapt.
And one way to do that is, as a leader, just stick to your principles. Just change the methods.
Yep.
Right. And the best way to change your methods is to empathize, to listen, and have that. And look at all three of those things that we have a tendency to do as 1980s pickup trucks, right? Oh, you guys didn't grow up the way we did.
Right.
I've already come into the discussion limiting the best that I can bring, because I didn't come from a place of love and caring. That's why it's so important to have a clean slate.
Yep.
So that you can come in and say, okay, I get it. Empathy, okay, I get it. Right, I feel with you. And then having the competency to say, okay, now we can make some movement. Now we can make, we can create a relationship where I can help you elevate at your game. Instead of like, hey, back in our day we did this. I mean, that's our methods, right? But just carry the principles over, and that's something that you could always carry with you. Let's change our methods. And again, when you empathize and you listen, you can. We're adults in this generation for a reason, right? Both to teach, but also to learn as well. And the good word says, "He that teacheth by the Spirit, he that receiveth, both are edified." Yeah, both rejoice and are edified, right? And so becomes a learner and a teacher experience.
I love it. Speaking of generational changes, I know for me, that was one thing that I came across as a high school football coach. That was one of like the first things I noticed was, as a leader, I was telling myself the same thing. Such a different generation.
Yeah.
In my time, we would have done this, and this, and we would have got this result. And you kids you guys don't react the same. But it came to a point in my coaching methods where I had to look myself in the mirror and say, now what? So what? If they don't react to that, then what am I going to do? Because nothing's going to change.
Right.
So as a leader, I feel like adapting could be the most valuable. It could be the one thing that you're missing.
Yeah.
Right? Because the principles work.
Yeah.
Principles are all the same. They're eternal. It's the method of adapting and applying those principles that changes.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. When you were growing up, you had a different upbringing. It was different times as well.
Yeah.
But if you could go back to your 16-year-old self as the leader that you are now, what's some advice you would give your 16-year-old self?
Oh man, I read that question in the pre-questions, and I thought about it, right? And I just thought myself in the advice that I give myself is keep going, keep going. At that moment, being a 1980s truck, I just kind of trusted everything my parents said. Not kind of, but it was like, let's go to church on Sunday and let's do this and do that, and can't date this, and I would say, the typical, and I wouldn't call it strict, because I've kind of looked at my my upbringing as, and I wouldn't say like a lot of freedoms. I was just selective with the things that I could and could not do, and it was based on things that were taught in my living room of you can't do this, can't do that. That's what it looked like back then. But what I really understand now is that it was developing more for who I would become, if that makes sense, right? So I'd always think, like, when I was younger, I thought my freedoms were like very narrow, right? My abilities to do things it was just like so focused, and take care of school, take care of the extracurricular activities, whether it be choir, whether it be football, and then mutual, and that was it. Like that was it, and I'd kind of like, well, this person gets to do this or this group, but it was kind of like I always was narrowed. And then now later on in life, I've seen that things have become broad, and it was, and I think it was because of the construct of how I was raised. The framework that I had gave me the opportunities later in life. If that made sense. And then some instances where like, and I don't like to call it freedom, but if there's not a structure and framework in the beginning, later in life, you start to be limited. If that makes sense.
Effect.
It's the opposite effect.
That's very true.
And so as a 16-year-old, it wasn't like I doubted or was like rebellious or anything like that. It was just like, all right, this should work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Ever since I was 12, and it was something I thought was genius from my dad. Ever since I was 12, we went to the temple every Saturday morning from when I was 12 to when I was 19.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a lot of baptisms.
It's a lot of baptisms, right? And I didn't quite understand why there's a JB's next to the temple, and that was one reason I went. You know, I was like, yeah, French toast, let's go, man. But you know, one of the reasons, and part of the incentives, I didn't get it at the moment, but then I started to understand a couple times. And as you go to the temple, there's a couple times where I'd go things throughout a teenage life, right, different phases, where I'd find myself in the restroom, in the house, just kind of contemplating with the Lord, like, help me with this, help me with that, help me with this, help me with that, right? And I didn't know until later what that was building and what that was for. Maybe that saved me from a couple Friday nights that could have been a demise of mine. Maybe that saved me from a couple different things, but I just knew that the culture and practices that my dad was trying to do back then, now is kind of coming to full light. And I'm like, wow, that's why, right? So just the thing that I guess I would tell my 16-year-old self is like, dude, you're on the right track, bro. Like, you're good. Like just continue to keep on doing it, continue to keep trusting, because there's a lot of influences that you can have as a youth and stuff like that. And I just be like, dude, just trust it, keep going, keep listening to the words of the prophets and apostles, right? Continue to honor your parents and just keep going that road.
Stay the course,
Yes, just stay the course, man.
Yeah.
Stay the course. I never imagined my life would ever be like this in terms of like just enjoyment, fulfillment, abundance with my family, my wife, my kids. I never ever thought it would be like this. But I feel it's because of the course that I was kind of trained in. So yeah, just keep going, man.